This thrilling story begins by showing a man who uses a time machine to go back to the past and change events. His name is John, and he traveled from 1990 to 1975. In fact, a massive bomb blast occurred in 1975, which killed almost more than half of the city's population. Therefore, John's task was to time travel to 1975 and defuse that bomb. If he could prevent the bomb from exploding in the past, then all the people who died in that blast would be alive in the future. John was provided with all the information about where the bomb was planted, so he traveled to the location in 1975. After searching extensively, he found the bomb. But just then, another man arrived at the scene and attacked John. John also pulled out his gun and kept firing at the man while trying to move the bomb aside. However, he made a significant mistake here, and the bomb exploded immediately. Being right in front of the blast, John's entire body was burned. More than half of John's body was severely damaged. As John was writhing in pain, another man appeared before him and used John's time machine to send him back to his time, which was 1990. After being unconscious for several days, when John opened his eyes, his entire body was covered in bandages because his skin had been burned due to the blast. John couldn't believe that the events that had occurred to him in the past were still present in his current time, and now it seemed he would never be able to return to his true form. Since John received proper treatment, he gradually began to recover. His entire facial structure had changed due to the skin burns, but he underwent plastic surgery and was given a new face. Now, fully healed, John needed some money, so the company gave him one last job, which required him to go to the past to complete a mission. John fully prepared himself and was sent back to 1970 with the help of the time machine. He began to work as a tender to gradually complete his mission during that time. As time went on, one day a boy entered John's bar. Upon seeing him, John immediately understood that this was his younger self, his young version from 1970. However, the young John did not recognize his older self because the current John's face had been burned and had undergone plastic surgery. But the John from 1990 knew exactly that this was his young version. Now, John started talking comfortably with his younger self. Within a short time, the young John became very comfortable with him and shared some interesting things about himself. The young John mentioned that he had been an orphan since childhood and had no idea who his mom and dad were. He also had some strange powers, and the most significant thing was that he was not a boy, but a girl during his childhood. His name back then was Jane. Due to Jane's behavior and strange powers, no one wanted to adopt her, meaning she spent her entire childhood in solitude. As Jane grew up, she managed to secure a significant scholarship thanks to her high IQ, which could enroll her in a space program. Trials began for all the students who received the scholarship, but then suddenly, a scientist named Dr. Robert discovered shocking news about Jane. He found in a report that Jane had both male and female organs in her body and had the ability to change into the other gender due to the presence of both male and female hormones. However, she had chosen to identify as female at that time. But Dr. Robert never disclosed this information to Jane and removed her from the space program. Jane was very upset about this, but she had to move on with her life. She gradually progressed and, within a short time, fell in love with a man. They entered into a physical relationship, but one day, that man suddenly told Jane that he had to leave for some work and would return soon. However, after that, he never came back to Jane. Soon, Jane realized she was pregnant and was about to give birth. Consequently, all the doctors came to the operating theater to perform her surgery. After Jane gave birth to her baby, she thought everything would return to normal. However, the doctors came to her with the truth. They explained that her body contained both male and female hormones and organs, but to save her baby, they had to completely remove her female organs. Now, only male organs and hormones remained in her body. If the doctor's team hadn't taken this action, both Jane and her baby would have died during the operation. Hearing all this shocked Jane, as she was just now learning this reality. The doctors told her that this was the truth, and she would have to live her life from now on as a man. This meant that in a short time, Jane, who was a woman, would gradually transform into a man. The shocking moment came when someone stole Jane's baby from the hospital. By the time she rushed to save her child, the baby had already disappeared. As time passed, Jane began to convert into a man, so she changed her name from Jane to John. Since then, Jane had been living the life of a man. The young John was now sharing everything with his future self. The young John said, "This is my story, but I'm sure you won't believe it." Little did he know that it was indeed his own story. So, the John from 1990 shook hands with him and said, "I completely believe this story, and I will help you as much as I can." The John from 1990 then called the young John over and took out the time machine. He said, "I want to introduce you to your lover so that you can find out why he ultimately left you." John sent the young John back 5 years into the timeline when he was still a girl and had met his lover for the first time. John arrived in the past at the university, where the female John was present. A small collision occurred between them, during which John recognized his female version. However, the female John, who was actually Jane, could not recognize her future self. It was at this moment that John realized that Jane had collided with a stranger back then. Later, the person with whom he had a relationship turned out to be none other than the future John himself. They would end up together, and the 1990 John was watching all of this from a distance. He then set the time machine to 1975 and teleported back to that time. In fact, John had decided to defuse the bomb while using this opportunity. As soon as he arrived at the location where the bomb was planted, John saw a terrorist planting the bomb. So, he immediately started attacking him. The terrorist cleverly captured John, knocked him out, and left him unconscious. After some time, when John opened his eyes, he saw a man burning near the bomb. The man's body was completely charred due to the flames, and he was writhing in agony, trying to reach for his bag. John rushed over and handed the bag to the man. The man quickly opened his bag, which contained a time machine, and he set it to teleport to the year 1919. It was then that John realized that this man was none other than himself from the future. In other words, the man who helped him when he was burning was actually John himself. Now, everything began to make sense to John. He quickly took out the time machine and went back to the time when his younger self had left his female version. At that time, Jane had already given birth to her baby, but now John had gone to the hospital and stolen Jane's baby. He brought the child back to 1975, meaning that when Jane's baby was taken, it was none other than the 1990 John who had stolen it. John then left the child at the same orphanage where he had been raised, believing that the child would be safe there. After sorting everything out, John entered the time machine and went back to the time when he had gone to meet his younger self, the time when the younger John was in a relationship with Jane. The 1990 John called his younger self over and said, "We have to go now," but the younger John understood that Jane was completely alone. He couldn't just leave her like that. But when the younger John approached the 1990 John, he revealed the entire truth. He was the future version here to help him, and the girl he was dating was actually his previous version when he used to be a girl. The younger John understood everything, and now he was ready to go with him. This was the time when Jane was being left by her boyfriend, who was none other than John. Now, the 1990 John time-traveled with his younger version to 1985. This was the same place where the present John used to work at his agency. In fact, he brought his younger version here so that he could recruit him as a new agent in his company because he himself was very tired and wanted to retire from all this. He informed his manager about how he had time-traveled and brought his younger version here. The younger John was now hired at the company, where he would work in the same position. The 1990 John then returned to his time and started working as a bartender. He decided that he would never use the time machine again and would retire for good. He even tried to destroy or shut down his time machine, but the machine malfunctioned, meaning it was not breaking down as John intended. This meant that John could still use the time machine to travel forward and backward in time. While there, John found some strange writings on papers. These were actually notes written by Dr. Robert, who had tried to give John clues about the location of the terrorist who planted the bomb and killed all those people in 1975. This was John's first mission that he couldn't complete, so he had a desire to eliminate that terrorist before the bomb blast. Following all the information provided by Dr. Robert, John used the time machine one last time and went back to the moment when the terrorist was planning to make those bombs. John immediately pointed his gun at the terrorist and told him to put his hands up. Then John realized that this was none other than his own future self, who had undergone plastic surgery after the bomb blast. This meant that the one responsible for the bomb blast was none other than he himself. John's mind was completely bewildered, struggling to comprehend what was happening to him. However, just as he knew everything about his younger version, he couldn't figure out much about his older version. It was evident that the condition of this future John had deteriorated significantly. His mental state had reached a whole new level of chaos. The older John explained that all of this had happened because of a time machine. He had been using the time machine continuously without informing his company, traveling back and forth in time. If he had reported the malfunction of the time machine to the company, they would have decommissioned it, but the older John had continued to use it multiple times, worsening his own condition. The 1990 John couldn't understand how he could possibly cause the bomb blast since he was trying to capture the terrorist who had taken so many lives. But the older John insisted that the future couldn't be changed no matter what you did. Frustrated, the 1990 John shot his older version because he didn't want these things to come back to haunt him. However, as the older John had said, the future was never going to change. Now John began to grasp his future a little better. Since he hadn't decommissioned the time machine, he got the clue that he could use it multiple times. As a result, he would go on to use this time machine repeatedly, leading him to become a dangerous terrorist who would execute a bomb blast, killing many people simultaneously. Thus, John, unwillingly, would have to engage in all of these actions. He was trapped in a loop where, despite doing nothing, everything was predetermined. Whatever was meant to happen in the future would inevitably occur. At this point, John kept looking at his time machine, finally beginning to understand the whole truth. In fact, all the characters John interacted with in this entire story were none other than his future and past selves. John traveled back in time using the time machine and met his younger self, and in the same way, he meets his future self, who will later carry out the bomb blast. When John initially went to stop the bomb from exploding, his entire body was already burnt. The person who helped him was John, and the one who executed the blast was also John. After that, he went to 1970 to meet his younger self, and then both timeline versions of John went back to the time when he was a lady. The person with whom the younger John had a relationship was also John. Due to their physical relationship, the child that resulted was taken by the 1990 John, who then brought the child back to the orphanage where he was raised. The shocking part is that this child would also become John, who would later turn into Jean, the girl. This entire cycle would continue in this manner, meaning that John's life is indeed stuck in a loop because of the strange use of the time machine. Unwillingly, John will end up doing the same things that his future version did as a terrorist, causing a blast and killing everyone. The time machine was still present with John in the present timeline, which allowed him to carry out all these actions. The malfunction in John's time machine occurred when he was trying to deactivate it. An invisible radiation began to emanate from the time machine, combining with John, and now he would have to do all the things that his future version had done. He would use the time machine many times for his own benefit, and eventually, due to his deteriorating mental balance, he would become a psychopath. Thus, John found himself in a massive disaster from which he would never escape. This is how our mind-bending story comes to an end.